Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So today we get to continue our discourse on Mary Pfeiffer's observations about development of girls and women from a clinical point of view. So last time we were talking about social dynamics, deep structure and surface structure, and how what seems very surface, can I dye my hair, can actually reflect some deep process, but not always, and not all deep processes come to the surface. And so Pfeiffer talks about how it is that relationships for girls in late elementary school and throughout junior high school, and maybe even into high school, are fractious, meaning that they are challenging, they fracture easily, they come back together easily, etc. That it's a time of a lot of emotional drama, because she says disproportionately for girls, they are processing things on both the surface level and a deep structure level at the same time. And it's not necessarily always clear to the young lady doing the processing or to her friends about what's being processed and how. So hurt feelings can be super hurt super easily without the other parties intending to hurt. And because these young women are doing their own deep structure work, that they tend to be in pain themselves sometimes and then react in painful ways while they're in pain. And that also increases the fractiousness. Likewise, though, because they're doing deep structure work and surface structure work, that they tend to come together quite quickly too, in most cases, not all. Some people get really hurt and then become more loners throughout adolescence. Other people who started off more loners might become more sociable. It's a time, again, of transformation, of this, where two ecologies come together, like childhood and adulthood. There too is the most fertile possibilities. Okay, one of the things that Pfeiffer, and I appreciate her doing this, spends a fair bit of time on is in physical development. As the body calls attention to itself as new or different, anytime our body changes attention to itself. Now, I don't have direct experience with, say, developing breasts or broad hips, although my hips don't lie. They are different than a woman's hips would be. So, and likewise, I don't have much breast tissue at all, being a man. However, I do know very well what it's like for our bodies to call attention to themselves in a way, and so it helps me be somewhat sympathetic, as much as sympathetic and compassionate as it can be, around these issues. I was 6'5" before I turned 16, so it was during my 15th year. There was a little celebration because I'd crossed 6'4" and was 6'5" before I was 16. Now, I'm only 6'5", 6'6" now. That means I stopped growing at about 14 and a half. So imagine how quickly I grew, right? A 6.5 foot tall 14-year-old. 15-year-old, thank you. 15-year-old. And my body never fit, right? That it was like my sister joked about my incredible Hulk shoes. What she meant by that is my feet grew so quickly they would burst out of my shoes. And my poor parents, who were poor, not just poor as in they had to put up with me, but also poor in the sense they had no money, couldn't keep me in shoes. So I was often just barefoot all summers long because my feet grew so fast, right? They couldn't keep me in pants because my legs grew so long. Like, some people talk about growing pains. Some of us know exactly what growing pains means, where the bones, especially in my legs, would just ache and hurt. And I'd be laying down in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep because my bones hurt so bad. And so imagine, though, that as you are growing, there are parts of you that are growing out, not necessarily up. And so one of the things that also is interesting is that our body's changing and calling attention to the body parts that are changing can be beautiful and meaningful. And many times for boys and girls, it often is. One of the things that Pfeiffer gets to worry about is the ways in which it is disproportionately less fun, less pleasurable, less interesting for girls, because the way in which our cultures and our society takes these bodies up. So, as you can see here on my notes, as the female body begins to round out, it rounds out in a way that our cultures call fat, which in our society is a grave insult. And You know, as a father of daughters, especially daughters who are our culture would call curvy, it really broke my heart that I see my beautiful daughters developing into women and it's crushing their self-esteem because of the way other people are responding to them. And so fat is a grave insult. In fact, Leilani, when you have a moment, would you be so kind as to see if you can find a YouTube video on Miss Ivory Coast competitions? Because in Miss Ivory Coast, the women who compete for the in the beauty contest Miss Ivory Coast are obese by American standards, but it is the standard of beauty in the Ivory Coast. In fact, the men tend to be quite slender and the women tend to be quite curvy. So, in terms of their aesthetic ideal, which is different than our culture. If I was in Ivory Coast and I went, "Girl, your ass is fat," she'd be like, "Thank you." You know what I mean? And we're seeing a little bit of that develop in American society in a kind of a schizophrenic way, where there is celebration of thickness. In fact, my kids were telling me about this the other day. THICC, thick. That them, broad hips, big thighs, etc. And there's some celebration of that. And yet, girls who are celebrated for being thick, when surveyed, often feel a great deal of body dissatisfaction, wishing they were skinnier. And the skinnier girls express a lot of body dissatisfaction, wishing they were thicker, THICCER, right? Thicker. And so nobody's happy with their bodies and nobody begins to win. And so Pfeiffer talks about this at length in the chapters of one of her studies. So Wendy Bantam, public intellectual commentarian, every day in a woman's life is every day in the life of a woman is a walking Miss America contest. Boy, I hope that's not the case. But at the same time, though, for some women it is. Not for all women. So please don't misunderstand Pfeiffer here. But she's talking about disproportionately the girls who would end up coming to her for therapy, that many of them feel scrutinized all the time. And but the scrutiny isn't necessarily welcome or fun. Like being as tall as I am, I tend to stand out in a crowd. Like my wife has videotape. We were in Taiwan a couple of years ago, and I was walking through the market district early in the evening. So it was dark, and I'm moving my way through crowds of people there in Taipei in one of the market districts. And my wife was filming from a distance because people would just stop and stare at this giant American walking through, right? Well, here in Utah, I'm actually closer to average size than anywhere else I've lived. Like I can go the other day, just a couple weeks ago, I was at Costco and I was buying some fruits and vegetables. And so I'm in the produce area and I'm talking to some other gentlemen. We're talking about the bananas. And one of them noted that we were all around the same height. One was 6'3", one was 6'5", one was 6'7", and the 6'7" guy said, "It's nice to feel normal for a change." And I looked at him and said, I didn't say this out loud. What I thought was, I always feel normal. But I just looked at him and said, I'm glad you feel like you fit in. And I didn't tell him about the research I've done that shows that uh, multiple generational Utahns, people whose generations have been here for a while, are disproportionately taller compared to the national average. And so not like the Dutch, you know what I mean, or the the name of the Maasai in Africa. So not quite like that, but up there. So so height is of issue, right? And girls are self-conscious about their height more so than boys. So therefore, tall girls, on the one hand, are celebrated for being tall and denigrated. Thin girls are celebrated for being thin, but also criticized for being thin. Thick girls are celebrated for being thick, but also criticized for not being thin. A woman can't win. If they're too homely, they lose. Okay? If they're too pretty, they lose. Homely is to disappear. What little feedback you hear about self is either deliberately or accidentally cruel. Like deliberately cruel. Move your fat ass, right? That is deliberately cruel. Accidentally cruel is, Oh, she is such a sweet spirit. I think you should take my friend Jane out on a date. She is such a sweet spirit, right? And there's poor Jane hearing this all over the phone and just wilting inside, just, oh, kill me now, right? It's painful. So here's the thing though. If you if you're super pretty, you disappear as well. Your mind, your soul vanishes behind a curtain of beauty, and rarely is it allowed to emerge. And our culture supports this to a strong extent. Do we let pretty women be intelligent, or do we insist they just be pretty? So I'm thinking of some of the clients I've had through the years. Some of them have been models, Instagram influencers, etc. But I don't like that association with them because they're not like arrogant influence. Like, I'll give you a positive review if you let me stay in the Waldorf Astoria $1,500 a night for free. Not like that. Instead, they happen to have lots and lots of followers on Instagram because they happen to be pretty and they happen to post a lot of pictures of themselves, especially in their workout gear. You feel me? So, but what's interesting in talking to these women is, especially I'm thinking of several of them in particular, coming into therapy was so meaningful because they could finally be seen, they could finally be heard. That with me, they got to be smart or insecure or all the other things they're not allowed to be outside of my office. And so, and girls who experience themselves as less attractive are finally seen as well. Like, I have one client now that she does not believe herself to be attractive. She's very charismatic, very dynamic person, very fun to talk to. And she comes in and talks, and I just keep it, there's all these things we could be working on, but you just want to sit and swap movie stories with me. I said, why is that? And she says, because finally somebody will sit and swap movie stories with me. She says, you don't get it. Nobody else, like, I've been to therapy before and it's all about my problems and all about my issues. Nobody just and sees me for who I am. And my heart shattered that in my field, you think the one field where we would be good at really seeing people, really apprehending them as people, and really appreciating the magnificence that they are, has failed the most. Okay. So we live in a society where appearance, style, matters more than substance. Seeming one way matters more than being a way. So, like, some of you have seen the research on this. Sachs mentions it a little bit in one of the editions of his book. Matcha green tea, drink champions. So, research done with kindergartners, and this study's been replicated many times, where they will have a photograph of what our culture considers an attractive adult, right? And our society disproportionately sees Caucasian faces as more attractive and sees certain facial features as more attractive and certain weight parameters as more attractive. And so you show kindergartners somebody that is stereotypically attractive in our culture and ask them, okay, and then another picture of somebody who is less attractive, and they'll say, okay, to these kindergartners, point to the person who is good, and they point to the pretty face. Now point to the person who's bad, and they point to the less pretty face. So, being aware of this research since high school, I took my first psychology class in high school. There used to be a show on TV called The X-Files. I don't know if your parents are science fiction nerds, but if they are, ask them about The X-Files. So The X-Files was a 90s show about, alien abductions and the Mothman prophecies and the FBI, two FBI agents who investigate all these weird paranormal things. And several of my friends were really into it. They're like, Matt, why don't you come watch X-Files with us? And I go, because I disagree with their fundamental premise. And they go, what do you mean? I mean, dude, you've read about UFOs and everything else for years. I said, yes, I have. I'm very interested in those kind of concepts, but I dislike their premise. And they go, what's the premise? That if it's ugly, it's bad. Never once in that show is somebody with a disfigured face the champion or the hero. They're always the alien in disguise or the serial killer who's being mind controlled by a demon or something like that. That never are they the champion, the good guy, the one who sacrifices themselves for everybody else. That it is so deeply ingrained in our culture, it even comes out in our movies. So, movies and TV shows. So, Simone de Beauvoir. wrote, "To lose confidence in one's body is to lose confidence in oneself." Woo! Now, she was speaking particularly about women and girls. At the same time, though, that also seems to apply to men. Like, I'm thinking of a friend of mine. He's a heavy, like I am. He's not skinny, but he's got all sorts of body confidence. Like, he'll come strutting out to the pool. He's got his big old belly, his broad chest. He's hairy. He'll come strutting out to the pool going, "Hey, how you doing?" And it's not compensation. He's genuinely secure in himself. And so because of that, he exudes confidence. And because of that, he gets a lot of dates. You know what I mean? And it's not, how would I put this? And he's not smarmy, creepy, coming on to everybody all the time and just luck of the draw that he has 50 people out, and 49 say no, the one who says yes. It's that he's genuinely comfortable with himself, so he's easy to talk to, so therefore he's pleasant company, and that's pretty attractive, right? And so likewise, I'm thinking of a girlfriend of mine. She's again, her doctor tells her she's fat and she needs to lose weight. Then again, you could be anorexic and some doctors would still tell you to lose weight. But she is well overweight according to our cultural norms. But she has no problem in the dating department. She just is pleasant company. She's secure in who she is. It's very sexy. And so I love Simone de Beauvoir's quote, and just looking how it's true across the sexes and genders, but particularly for women. Now, for me, this really, there's a dagger in here, though, for me. There's some barb, like dragging a little piece of barbed wire through my brain. Because Beauvoir was the mistress to a famous male philosopher. And so she's doing her philosopher, and his name just fled my brain. Would you look up de Beauvoir's lover, philosopher de Beauvoir's lover? I can see he had one lazy eye that would like stick clear over to the side even. It's not coming to mind. But they were on again, off again lovers, but to win his attention, she would bring him underage girls, like 12, 13-year-olds, for him to seduce. And then that would keep him interested in her. And so it's interesting that one of the founders of feminism was a founder of feminism because of her own struggles at managing her relationships with a particular man.
Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh, it's Sartre. Now, how do you pronounce that in that European language?
Sartre.
Okay. I don't know if you guys can hear Leilani. I can't make that sound that she makes. So here in America, we mispronounce it Sartre, but it's actually pronounced
Sartre.
Okay. So still, your French pronunciation is, I only pronounce things in American, unfortunately. It shows my paucity of education. So, so some people, like in some of my theories of psychology class, when we study Beauvoir, some of my students are deeply offended by Beauvoir's behavior, and I think it's okay that they're offended. I think what she did, and more importantly, what Sartre did, was deeply damaging and morally aberrant. At the same time, though, it was her participation in this aberrance and what we would call cognitive dissonance about the aberrance that then fueled her very insightful and penetrating feminist critiques of philosophy and culture. So nothing like dancing with the devil to realize how much his hands burn, right? So not saying what she did was okay, sure as hell not what Sartre did. At the same time, though, I get it. And doesn't make it okay. I just get it. So we've got the physical self, right? And Pfeiffer talks about how for some girls they can't win. That if they're early bloomers, they lose in some ways. But if they're early bloomers, they also win in some ways, depending on the nexus of relationships within which they are situated. So in some relationships, girls get the criticism more than praise, and they don't necessarily have a strong family, especially a strong paternal figure to fall back on, to feel loved by and related to by. And so therefore they get all of the curses and none of the blessings. For other girls, though, they get both the blessing and curses. There can be real strength that comes from early development, and that also seems to rely on the nexus of relationships within which one is situated. So, and then our bodies are a blessing and a curse, that if we're pretty, we're invisible because all people see is pretty, and if we're less pretty, then we just fade into the woodwork. So we've got all this physical development going on for girls, but there's also this emotional development she talks about. So the emotional system in adolescence is immature and not yet fully functioning, and makes it difficult to deal with emotions. So there are two ways to deal with emotions. There is one, true to self. I am having these emotional experiences. They are not having me. I have my feelings rather than feeling helpless, right? So I get to feel what I feel and own it, but I am the one feeling these feelings. I am not depressed. I'm feeling some depression right now, okay? Self. Will run away or distract self from bad feelings, feel helpless in the face of them, or to think of only of others' feelings and ignoring their own. It's really fun for me that, like, what was it? Tuesday night, my daughter Diamlin made us this amazing dinner. She made us steamed vegetables with like this little olive oil garlic seasoning on it, and then these roasted cubed potatoes that were super crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, very well herbed, her combination of herbs and spices, and then this sweet, spicy roast chicken. It was so good. And as I'm in the kitchen and I'm puttering alongside her, I wasn't helping her cook, but she would get, oh, I'm sorry. And she would like throw her hands up against her, sorry. And I'm like, where does this come from, Diamlin? I've never criticized you for being underfoot. I've always enjoyed your company. So where is this, I'm sorry, coming from? Like, why do you have a panic attack when you feel that you're in somebody's way? And she says, I don't know. I said, well, please think about it, because it didn't come from your mom or I, right? We never told our kids to go away or go in the other room or go away, kid, you bother me. So where did it come from? And then later she came to me and she said, it's because compared to my peers when I was younger, I was always so big, I was running into them in things, and they would always point that out to me. Even my friends would be like, wow, your hips just keep knocking over. And so she just feels like my body is so big it's filling up the whole room, and she's not that big. And so, yeah. So one of the things that I notice is that these feelings will run away with her, right? And it happens with a lot of people, not to throw my poor daughter under the bus, but it happens to a lot of people where rather than going, okay, I'm feeling a little insecure right now, and it's okay because I'm just in the kitchen with Dad, we're both puttering, everything's fine. Instead, it seems to ask, say, a 13-year-old. I mean, my daughter's 20, that daughter's 20. Actually, both my daughters are, nope, Kayla just turned 21. So that seems to be asking a lot of a 13-year-old girl to have that kind of true to self reasoning and emotions, but some do, right? So the other thing that I really like that Pfeiffer connects to is that too often disproportionately girls will shunt, push down, set aside their own feelings and live according to the feelings of the people that are around them, right? Boyfriends, parents, girlfriends, that they are shunting away their own feeling, or rather than processing or owning their own feeling, instead it's constantly putting that aside for the sake of the comfort of other people or the emotions of other people. And so that breaks my heart because, well, I'm thinking of one young lady who shared a story of a close relative dying, and the death was expected but unexpected, meaning grandpa's going to die any day, but when it comes, it's still, the anticipatory grief can only help you so much, right? So she and grandpa were very close. brother, mother are all around the bed. Grandpa's just passed away. They're calling the mortician to come pick up the body, and one of them needed to go pick up the little sister. And so mom and older brother look at her and say, okay, you work. And so she gets in the car and she starts driving, and she just starts sobbing so hard she has to pull over, just racking sobs. And then she, makes her way to a gas station, and she talks very vividly, Diet Pepsi. No, yeah, Diet Pepsi, and just guzzling that down. And she said it was almost like every gulp of that heavily carbonated soda was just pushing away the of grief, like drowning it or pushing it against the walls of her chest where she can manage it rather than sitting so heavily at her core. And so she was just drowning the feelings by guzzling. Well, lo and behold, 15 years later, she's in my clinic. She's severely alcoholic, right? That not owning and not feeling our feelings and being told we can't feel our feelings is a recipe for a lot of pain. I wish we were here to talk about this face to face. Because I've got pages and pages and pages of notes from Kimmel, Pfeiffer, and Pinker to discuss, and unfortunately, we'll only scratch the surface of these. So, formal operations, okay, if you remember your Piaget, so you have your pre-operational, concrete operational, no, sensory motor, thank you, sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational stages of intellectual development, okay? These are the ways in which our schemas increase in diversity and complexity. So assimilation and accommodation. If you guys remember from your development class, assimilation is the information that comes in is integrated into the schemas I already have. Accommodation is when I have to accommodate new stimuli that doesn't fit any of my schemas, so I need to develop new schemas in order to accommodate the stimuli coming in. And so formal operations is the most highly abstract form of schematic development. In fact, as a tangent, about 30% of Americans on average never reach formal operations. Okay. Like, it's probably been about 5 years ago now. I used to have my psychology 1010 students actually put together their own simple little psychology studies and carry them out. I had to stop doing that because lawyers got involved, not because anything bad had happened, but lawyers look for work and they try to prevent anything that would cause the university to get in any trouble, even if it means greatly hampering basic education for. Okay, so the students back then used to be able to run their own little studies, and one of the studies was a replication of Piaget's task, his conservation task. So two students set up a booth over here in the liberal arts concourse, so that big hallway over here that goes through the liberal arts building. And so they had a table, and you come and you could get a candy bar if you did a simple test for them. And so they had 3 sets of beakers. So they had 2 sets of 3 beakers each. I'm sorry, 2 sets of three beakers each. On the first beaker, it was a symmetrical beaker, so it was as wide as it was tall, and it said 2 cups, and it had 2 cups of blue liquid in it. Then they had a short, fat beaker, right? It was shorter than it was wide. It was wider than it was tall. And then they had a tall, thin beaker, right? Now, keep in mind, the first beaker is labeled 2 cups, and the line of water, blue water, matches that. And so what they did is they did an experiment. So they would you like a candy bar? People, so people say, yeah, I want a candy bar. And they'd say, okay, watch. So they would take the 2-cup measure and they would pour 2 cups into the short fat beaker, and then they would pour 2 cups into the tall thin beaker. And then they would look at the student here at UVU, college student here at UVU, and say, which one has more liquid in it? 30% of your peers said the tall, skinny beaker had more liquid in it. 30%. Next time you're in a study group and you're wondering how these people are in college, 30% failed the basic task of conservation. 1 in 3. Okay. So when I'm grading papers, sometimes my assistant instructors will be like, Matt, you're a little lenient. And I go, beakers. right? 1 in 3 can't even handle basic conservation. The fact they can write English is a coup. It's a win. I'm going to take it. Okay, even if it's maybe not very good English, it's their writing. That's a good start. So formal operations is the ability to think abstractly. Okay, it's the ability to ask what if and actually move your thought through in a realistic way. What if? And so one of the things that Pfeiffer found is that formal operations isn't necessarily a blessing. And by the way, that 30% is disproportionately male. Okay, more women than men develop formal operational thinking and do so younger, right? There's that old adage in psychology that the frontal lobes, which is the abstract critical thinking part of it's implicated in abstract and critical thinking. It doesn't fully develop for men until 26, but for women, it's often done at 18, right? So the averages are 8 years apart. That's very controversial. It doesn't necessarily mean anything because I can have, an immature frontal lobe and still show remarkable critical thinking capacity. So again, correlation is not causation. So one of the things that happens with formal operations is when we begin thinking that way, it's like when we're a kid, we have a new tool or a new toy to play with. So one of the things that can happen is one incident means all cases. A fight with a friend means I have no friends at all, where they begin to abstract ahead that if this relationship fell apart, then maybe all my relationships, or maybe all of my relationships have fallen apart. So therefore, one of their friends gets a car at 16. Well, they come home and say, well, Mom, all my friends got a car at 16. No, one friend got a car. So they're still struggling with applying the formational skills that they have. So like thinking of this in terms of my own daughters, and I saw that several times where they would be in a fight with a friend and their whole world had ended and they were utterly alone and nothing will help and nobody loves them anymore, right? That shows that the formal operational thinking has not yet fully blossomed. It's beginning, but it's not quite there. So therefore, there's a lot more emotional misery associated with this than there needs to be. So everybody dresses this particular way. Okay, so I visit their school and 2 people out of 30 are dressed the way they're talking about, right? So one of the things that we also see, and Pfeiffer calls this out, is the imaginary audience syndrome when people begin to develop formal operational thinking. So this assumption that everybody's watching or everybody is aware of them all the time, which then causes a lot of self-awareness, but not necessarily in an insightful way, but self-consciousness. Thank you. Self-consciousness. Everyone's watching all the time. Some women never tune into the fact that nobody who matters cares about the petty issues. Nobody who matters cares that their socks are mismatched in a way that isn't as stylish as the young lady preferred. Okay. So, and again, I find this among college students where I had tell the story of me and one of my assistant instructors walking across campus, and her feeling very self-conscious and wanting to move across the rooftops of the buildings rather than walk through the main concourses because she feels people are staring at her all the time. And she lost a bet where I said nobody's going to stop and stare at us, even though she's 5 feet tall, very tattooed, and I'm 6.5 feet tall and very not tattooed. That well, not that anybody else can see, right? That as we're walking through the concourses, nobody stopped to stare, but she genuinely thought that they would, and it turns out that her assumption always is that people were always staring at her. And I'm like, honey, they're not. So the other thing, early in formal operations, is this curse that if you think it's true, then it's true. Meaning if I can reason out how this is true, then it is true, and now it's hard to talk me out of it. Like, I see this a lot with the multiple choice questions that I give, where I've got these extremely smart people who, as they're reading the question and they're reading the distractors, are thinking in highly abstract, highly formal, incredibly high IQ, big brained way about every distractor. And I'll get an email from them, and they will make these very finely nuanced philosophical arguments about a page long about how, although you mark the answer as C, the B is also a correct answer, so I should get credit for B. And if I follow their train of thought, they're often right. But here's the thing. These are also the students saying your 12 limit time limit is way too short. Well, if you're turning every multiple choice question into a philosophical discourse, hours wouldn't be enough, right? Just read the question as it is, and please read the question as intended. Don't turn it into a highly nuanced philosophical discourse. But at the same time, though, I'm also asking them not to be big brained about a quiz. And how is that for screwed up, right? The whole point is to be big brained. But the trick of mastering formal operations is to know, to what degree should I be big brained at any one time, right? Is this meant to be a tricky philosophical multiple choice exam? No, it's not. So therefore, I can focus my big brainness and simplify rather than make things complex. But it's hard to do when you have this massive frontal lobe. So the myth of personal invulnerability. I'm curious about this because there was a series of studies in the 80s and 90s, and I haven't seen any recent. So this may be something you all might look into. So when these studies were done, there was a lot of conflict, armed conflict, civilians being killed and caught in the crossfire conflict in Northern Ireland and in Lebanon, okay? And some psychologists went through and studied the feelings of personal safety that girls had across the United States and across Lebanon and Northern Ireland. So in the areas where girls are regularly being killed, caught in the crossfire, victims of whatever military group is in charge and victimizing the local populace, that girls here in the United States felt less safe walking out to their cars or hanging out on campus than girls in Lebanon or Northern Ireland. So I would really like to see this a more recent replication of this. The trick is trying to get a grant as an undergraduate to go to a war-torn country where nobody's going to give you a grant to go there because it makes them liable. But I'm really curious about that. And so a question is why? And I have a few hypothetical answers. I'm not confident in these guys. So, well, Dr. Draper says, and please don't preach this as some kind of gospel. This is just Draper's wild ass guessing. When I survey my Psych 1010 classes, just in class, I say, okay, how many of you have been told that crime is at an all-time high? And almost every hand will go in the room. And I say, okay, and how many of you believe it? Only a couple hands will go down. Then I turn on the slide projector, the PowerPoint projector at the front of the room, and I show that according to the FBI crime people, the people who keep track of the rates of crime in this country, violent crime's been doing this since 1976. And yet, watching American television, you'd think it was Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome out there, that just getting to campus meant you had to through raping cannibals who are trying to kill you, rape you, and take your guzzling, right? That we are given the image that America is an extremely dangerous place. And compared to some countries, it is, right? But at the same time, though, it's an exaggerated, overinflated image. Like I've got colleagues, a friend of mine, she's from the UK. She teaches at Cambridge, and she really loves Americana, like the 1950s aesthetic of the diner and the girl on rollerblades bringing your burger out to your car, and the 50s pop music and the metal signs and the neon. She loves that aesthetic. And so you go in her apartment, she even has like neon signs that she's purchased at antique auctions in the United States. And it's really cool, the mirrored stainless steel and everything else. She's got one room in her house that is just Americana, Elvis Presley and bebop and everything else. Well, she wanted to tour across the country, especially small towns in the United States, to experience the rusting Americana, the way in which America has moved on from that era and left that to rot. And she likes rusty old signs and rusty classic cars and things like that as well. And so she wanted to come and experience that, but she was terrified that she's going to drive across this country and it's going to be nothing but rape and murder the entire time. And as an intellectual, she knew that wasn't the case, but she was still scared enough that I'm advising her and helping her plan her trip and teaching her what to look out for. Well, after she came through the United States, nobody tried to shoot her once. Nobody tried to rape her and steal her gasoline, not even once. She was treated, especially in small town America, treated with a lot of kindness, compassion, respect, curiosity, that it was a wonderful trip, and she's planning another trip in our post-COVID world. And so, well, when we become post-COVID, or we've adapted to what COVID is and what it means, then she'll try another trip. But it was interesting that this intellectual social scientist knew that America's hype about America's own deadliness and dangerousness was overblown, still needed reassurance and help. It reminds me of the Black Lives Matter protests in Salt Lake, and how two different newspapers showed two different things. One, it showed police and protesters like face to face, like, it was a tense standoff. And it turned out that only happened in about a 20 square foot area over a protest that happened over a full square mile, right? Just this tiny little bit. And that's where the reporters went. And so in response to that, because now reports are made in real time and news is pretty much written second by second, then people at the protest started counter tweeting and showing people sitting on lawns, eating sandwiches with Black Lives Matter, saying how the movement actually looks, you know what I mean, versus what the media shows you. So we keep telling girls that they're not safe. We keep telling people we live in a super hyper dangerous world. And therefore, that inflates their sense of dangerousness. Whereas in Northern Ireland and Lebanon at the time, they could see where the danger was. And interestingly enough, because of that, felt less dangerous. Because when I know I can locate where the danger is, the firefight is 2 blocks away, I feel safer than when I'm told the danger is everywhere and I'm walking out to my car after class. Right? You guys get that? Now, again, I'm still wild ass guessing here. I may come across more confident than I feel. But the other thing is, and we really need to hold on to this too, is that just because the rates of danger are far less in the society than our news would lead us to believe, doesn't mean that the danger doesn't happen. There are dangerous places to go. And sometimes the danger comes and gets you when you least expect it. At the same time, though, I really wish we taught one another, especially our girls, where the danger is. Yes, it is possible, statistically highly unlikely, but it is possible that you will be grabbed and stranger raped on your way to your car after class. Yes, it is conceivable that that could happen. But when we look at when girls are sexually assaulted, the highest percentages are by people they know intimately well, right? The most likely person to kill you is a person who sleeps in your house, if not in your same bed. The person most likely to rape you is somebody that you've had sex with before, consensually, right? So we like girls in Northern Ireland back in the 80s knew where the firefight was, right? The Irish, the NRA, the Northern Republic, the Northern Republic Army is going to detonate. The bombs are over there by the British, the firefights over there by the British, etc. So therefore, over here, 2 blocks away, I feel safe because I know where it is, right? And so therefore, what would happen in our society if we began to teach people where the danger is? Who is violating your boundaries? Who isn't taking no for an answer? Who takes advantage of you? Who start the firefights over there, right? And so if we start teaching people where the danger is, rather than it being ubiquitous and causing all sorts of unnecessary stress, instead it becomes hyper localized. I made it clear texting my Tinder match that I wasn't looking to have sex. I just wanted to go out and just experiment socially and casually dating. And after our date, he sent me a dick pic, but he was really nice. Maybe I should go out with him again. No, girlfriend, you made it clear that you were casually dating, not interested in hookups, and he's trying to turn it into a hookup. You see how he's not really listening to you? He may seem like he's attentive. In some ways he is, but at the same time, that's the danger. That's the firefights 2 blocks away. He sent me a dick pic after I made it clear I'm not interested in hookups, even though I think he's attractive, even though it was a really good date. That's not what I'm here for, right? He ignored you. He overrode your boundary. There's your firefight right there. Stay away. So again, wild ass guessing. It would be really interesting for one of you, not me, to go to these war-torn areas and do surveys on safety and then come back and then do surveys on safety here in the Happy Valley bubble. So oh, shoot, I'm out of time. Okay, so on Monday, we'll talk about, so we have the physical selves, the emotional selves. We'll get into the academic selves and the social selves on Monday, because I think today's Friday. Is today Friday?
Yes.
Yes, today's Friday. And so we'll get into that on Monday. And then after that, we will social selves, spiritual selves. Cool. Okay. So one of the things that I would like you guys to do is to go ahead and look at these videos. They don't necessarily relate topic to topic, point to point exactly for girls, but they are important and are informative of some of the other conversations we've had. As you guys know, I grossly over prepare for my classes. And so we could have spent the whole semester just on sex. We like sexual intercourse, sexual feeling, sexual experimentation, libido sex. Sex is in the biological development of us relative to our chromosomes. Gender, the social constructions of our relationships in a way that correlates with sex, but not as strongly as people assume. Like we could have taken a semester on each one of these. So just look through these. My list at home is actually now 3 times this long. So one of the things I'm thinking about doing is actually, let's you and I talk about when we teach this in the spring, actually doing like a Friday where there's a couple of these TED Talks assigned, and then making some of the videos that we film optional. Like here's some ones that seem to be core. Here's some with Draper mostly ranting. Let's make the ranting ones more optional. You know what I mean? Okay. So thank you, everybody. I will see some. Well, I won't see any of you ever, unfortunately, because teaching online sucks. But glad for your patience, and I will be back online on Monday.